Continuing education knows that at the end of the day, students want to graduate. And we can help them do that because we really listen to their needs. And we can offer them flexible options, both within continuing education and across the campus.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Thank you for joining us at the 78th Annual Conference on World Affairs. My name is Joe Thomas. I serve as the Senior Associate Vice Chancellor in the Division of Student Life at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I will be serving as today's moderator. For recording purposes, today's date is Tuesday, April 14th, 2026. It's 2:00 p.m., and our title for this panel is You're Saying There's a Chance, Building a Brighter Future for the World. Before we get started, I would like to read the University of Colorado Boulder's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We'll do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, by educating, conducting research, and supporting student success and integrating indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Thank you, and once again, welcome to CWA and today's discussion. We ask that all of our attendees remain respectful throughout the discussion and refrain from interruptions. Signs, banners, noisemakers, and other audible disruptions are not permitted and will result in those responsible being asked to leave the room. Time will be allotted for questions from our in-person audience. Welcome to those online as well. We will take your questions via handwritten note cards. Please raise your hand if you have a question, and a producer will give you a note card and a pencil. Please print legibly, then raise your hand when you have a completed card, and a producer will collect it and bring it to me. Now I would like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and I remind our audience that full speaker bios can be found online at the CWA website. As our speakers introduce themselves, I'm going to ask them to start with the question, are we actually capable of building a brighter future, or are we just getting better at talking about it?
Perfect. Thanks so much, Joe, and thanks for the conference for inviting me to talk about this big and important issue. And closer to the mic, how is that? Okay, closer.
Thank you.
Wait, the button is pushed.
Better.
No, I think, okay, we're here. Great, thank you so much, good. Hopefully you can learn from my failures. Great, so I'm an economics professor from Middlebury College, and I work on long-run economic growth. So I think about where we've been, how we've gotten here, and where we might be going. And so perhaps my specialty is talking about whether or not we are capable of building a brighter future. And I think the answer to that, from my perspective, is a resounding yes. And I think one way to understand where my optimism comes from is to remind ourselves that the deep past was filled with a very difficult time for humanity. It's possible that we now live in the best time to be a human being on the planet. I think if I were to be alive in any given year as a randomly allocated person around the world, it would be now. Extreme poverty is at its lowest level. You can see children are taller than ever around the world. That's a signal of their disease and nutritional environment. There's lots of measures. It would be hard to give a conclusive answer to whether or not we've made social progress, but I think in lots of ways this is the best time in terms of gender equality and lots of measures in that more humanities set of issues rather than economics. And so I think it's possible we've just come out of our best 25 years. And so the question of whether or not we can build a better future, I think my baseline naive view is yes. We've always had problems. We've overcome many of those problems. We've optimized things. We've changed the way we live. We've invented new technologies. And so the trajectory we're on is a pretty good one in my view, so long as we can trust what we're measuring in terms of how many people are living in deep poverty and these sorts of measures. So I am fundamentally optimistic about this. I think we do face real challenges still, but I think we have more bright minds than ever before to work on them. So my guess is 2050 will be a better CWA than 2025 and 2026 are. And with that, I will pass it along.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this event. My name is Azi Khalili. I was born and raised in Iran, and I have lived in the United States for over 30 years, and I work at the intersection of human rights, democracy, and gender justice. And I am a mother of a teenager. And every morning I get up, leave my bedroom, and put on my hope hat and enter her room and offer her a perspective about reality that I hope she can hold on to throughout the day. And that perspective is rooted in hope, rooted in social justice, and is rooted in doing the right thing for herself, for others around her, and for our society. So my answer to this question is hell yeah. And I'm quoting my teenage daughter. However, we do have to be more intentional. I do think that we're on the right path, but we do need to organize and be more intentional in the direction that humanity is going. I am a strong believer of moving beyond performative inclusion and moving towards creating real power on the grassroots level, and including the grassroots in the decision-making in our not-for-profits, in our churches, mosques, and synagogues, of course in our local government, on our federal government, and of course internationally. I do believe that the time has come for us to be very thoughtful about how we include people who are closest to the problems in creating the solutions that affect them. I have created a not-for-profit organization that worked in South Africa, India, and the US. And very quickly we learned that in order for us to create good outcomes, we had to include the people who were being affected by our programs. We could not sit in the background, come up with a whole set of ideas, and then implement them in the community. And also, I worked for 2 mayors. I worked for Mayor Bloomberg, and I worked for Mayor de Blasio in New York City as senior officials. And very quickly, we learned that we had to ask questions about who's being left out of decision-making, and how are we, the policies that we're creating, the programs that we're creating, how are they affecting people in the communities? Are we creating better outcomes? Or are they unintended, or are we creating unintended negative consequences in the lives of people through our work. So I am very excited to be here with you, speak a little bit about my own experience, and also about raising a teenager. Thank you.
My name's Scott Sherman, and I understand that we're supposed to have heated debates here, so I'm going to say we're not capable of building a better future. This is all futile. So I actually feel the same way as they do, very enthusiastic, because what I do for a living is I train the next generation of heroes, heroines, people who are going to change the world. And I started this because my education was terrible. I was trained, I went to UC Berkeley, which is a great school. In fact, one of my professors was like, congratulations, you're at one of 20 schools that claims to be in the top 10. So it's a really good school, but all my classes were about problems. They were all about the extent of the environmental crisis, poverty, violence, war, all of these things. I even looked, this is a true story, I looked at the course catalog and I did a search, and you can do it on the computer, and you can look up poverty, and there are hundreds of courses in the course catalog at Berkeley that deal with the topic of violence, but then if you type in violence plus solve or solving or solutions, zero. There's not a single syllabus that talks about solutions to violence. I did the same thing with poverty. Again, you come up with hundreds of classes that talk about the extent of poverty, but then when I typed in looking desperately for one on solutions, zero came up. They don't even spend a week talking about the most visionary, innovative solutions. So finally, desperate, I did it one last time with inequality. And so type it in, hundreds of courses that talk about inequality. Finally, I found 2 courses that had solutions to inequalities, both algebra courses. So there's a real problem in education, or at least my education. So going to school in the Bay Area, there's this newscaster, I don't know if he's still with us, but this guy, Scoop Nisker, who was on KFOG, if any of you ever lived in the Bay Area. And, you know, the news can be full of doom and gloom, and he would end his newscasts by saying, and if you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own. So I didn't like my education, so I decided to create my own. And I decided I was going to create courses that were looking for the most visionary, innovative ideas for solving the crises that we face. And so this is what I started, the Transformative Action Institute. And so the one story that I'll tell you, which is an embodiment of this, is in 2008, I was privileged to come here to Boulder and teach in the presidential leadership class for CU in a summer program. And there was this student who came up to me, and is anybody going to be offended if I swear, because this story involves a little bit of swearing? Like, raise your hand, because I'll try to if you're going to be offended. Okay, good, because I'd be fucked otherwise. So he comes up to me and he says, Scott, you seem like a nice guy, but I want to tell you, your class seems like total bullshit. He's like, I'm not going to be an innovator. I'm not going to be like, my hero is Paul Farmer, the great, public health figure. He's like, I could never be someone amazing like him who changes the world. So I said, okay, it's our little secret. Don't tell the other students that this class is BS, but you do need to take this to graduate from PLC, so just take the course. And not only did he start an organization in Nepal that went on to literally save hundreds of thousands of lives of young people who were at risk of malnutrition, but he calls me up a few years later and says, Scott, turn on the TV, turn on CNN. And I actually don't own a TV. So I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, President Clinton is on with Larry King, and he's saying, I know young people can change the world. And the way I know is because of people like Mark Arnoldy, this student, who's done incredible things. So yes, young people can change the world. So are we capable of building a better future? Absolutely, and it starts right here in this community.
I don't know about everyone's algorithms, but this is the most optimism I've heard or seen in a very long time. So this is great. The first official question really is about individualization versus systems. And Ozzy, you mentioned being more organized and intentional in what we're doing. And I'm curious to hear from all of you. This session is really rooted, the description mentions war, climate change, population decline, artificial intelligence. It's a which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Which is more important, individual action or systems? And how do those work together, or does one need to be fixed first? And that's to anyone. I mentioned, Ozzy, what you said, but sure.
I can start first. I'm a strong believer of two parallel movements. One is individual, where we have to make sure that every individual is involved in some form of healing from the effects of oppression on our minds. Effects of sexism, racism, the effects of war and violence on our minds, and all the places that it affects us and paralyzes us from being able to move, from being able to connect, from being able to feel dignity and connection to other humans. So that's one parallel. And the other parallel movement that I'm a strong believer of, and of course have dedicated good portion of my life and career to, is systems change, right? And systems change is absolutely necessary in making sure that people on the margins, that we create systems that systematically work for the majority of the population who are on the margins and help them centralize themselves and bring their needs and their solutions and have their needs and their solutions very much reflected in our systems. An economic system that works for all, that is not about a few benefiting and the majority not benefiting. A climate that is not about destruction of Earth, but a climate that is about sustaining of all of us. Thank you.
Great, yeah, I'll chime in here real quick as well. Yeah, so I think these two go hand in hand in some ways. In order to make big changes, eventually the collective does need to change. We need different policies. We need social environments that encourage people to make decisions that are socially beneficial rather than socially harmful. But especially in democratic societies, I find it hard to see how the collective can move without individuals moving in some way as well. So while I don't think it's for an activist in any movement, it doesn't seem productive to think of your life as a purity test for the issue that you might be agitating on behalf of. So I care quite a bit about animal farming, and so I think about the questions around people going vegetarian or vegan quite frequently. And I think in some ways for that issue, I think we need a society that makes it easier to make choices that are more animal and environmentally friendly. But I also think we need people experimenting and modeling behavior and showing the system that there's demand for this kind of thing. So I do think there's an important interplay, but we would be missing something really important if we focus too much on individual actions and not enough on the collective.
Yeah, the one thing that I'd add to that is I'm fascinated by the scientific research into hope as a mindset. And when we talk about hope colloquially, just in our language, we tend to say like, oh, I hope it won't rain tomorrow. But we have no control over whether it's going to rain or not. And scientists who actually study hope and have operationalized it from an academic sense have found that it's all based on agency, that hope is things that we have control over. So in terms of what both of you said, in terms of in order to influence the collective and to influence systems change, we have to believe and have this mindset that, yes, we can make changes. I mean, I remember I mentioned I went to Berkeley, and Berkeley, like I think Boulder as well, has this, strong activist tradition, this strong social justice tradition. And we used to march in the streets. I don't know if you do this in Boulder, and you say, the people united will never be defeated. Do you do that here? Yeah. We do it in Spanish too. We say, el pueblo unido jamás será vencido. And this friend of mine, she was a stand-up comedian, and she turned to me one time as we're marching through the streets saying, "The people, united, will never be defeated." And she turned to me and she said, "I don't think that's true." She said, "Maybe we should change the slogan to be a little more realistic. Let's march through the streets and say, 'The people, united, will sometimes win and sometimes lose.'" So I ended up going for a doctorate at the University of Michigan to study what are the circumstances, the strategies, and conditions in which individuals are most likely to succeed. When do we win and how do we win? And there is fascinating and really encouraging research, and I'm happy to talk more about in future questions, about how individuals do have agency and what are the best conditions to make that happen. But we can and we do create system change.
Thank you all. I appreciate that. Let's talk about politics for a second. Be a good one, a good shift. The individual actions we were just talking about, the influence, the hope, is all great, but there's often a gap between what experts are recommending to fix a particular problem, whether it be economics, I almost said enrollment decline because that's my higher education, but population decline, climate change. What can we realistically do, or what is unrealistic politically? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what we should do, because experts are saying these are solutions, but we don't see it as politically viable because.
This is a bit above my pay grade, so I'll probably give just a high-level answer. I think this is a really tricky problem, and partly comes back to this thought of the individual versus the collective. And again, we have representatives that are supposed to represent our interests, and we live in a democracy, and so in some ways, political feasibility has to be the background constraint on everything, and the challenge is to inspire hope with people and get us to change our view of what is politically feasible by changing minds, whether that's through individual conversations or trying to do more public outreach. There's lots of ways to do that. I don't know all the research on what's most effective, but yeah, no, I think sometimes technocrats and economists are guilty of this, maybe more than any other field, of feeling like we have a solution, but a solution that everybody would hate if you tried to implement it or get them to vote on it. And we, as a field, have run into problems trying to just slam things like a carbon tax through, even though a carbon tax is not something that people are happy to vote for. And so, yeah, so long as we want to work in this messy system of democracy, then we have to be doing things that are widely supported.
So here's where we'll have a little bit of heated debate, I guess. So going back to what you said, Kevin, in your first answer, I do actually agree with that very much, that we have made so much progress in my lifetimes. I mean, I think about, so when I was in college, it was in the midst of the Cold War, and it just seemed like we were going to have World War III. The only way that the US and the Soviet Union was going to overcome this conflict was through the use of nuclear weapons. And if you had told me in college that, oh, the Soviet Union is going to dissolve non-violently, essentially, and the whole Eastern Bloc, there'll be a velvet revolution in Czechoslovakia, Hungary, which we've again seen this amazing victory, all throughout the Eastern Bloc, all these non-violent revolutions will happen, and similarly, the apartheid regime in South Africa will fall, and there won't be this massive civil war. That's going to happen non-violently too. And Nelson Mandela, who's in jail, and de Klerk are going to share the Nobel Peace Prize. If you had said when I was in college, at the time, crime rates all over the United States were much higher. If you had said they're going to decline by more than 90% in the next few decades, again, I would have said these things are politically impossible. But all of these things happened because people took action even when people said it was impossible. And so I think that oftentimes we have to act and we make what seems impossible into something that is.
Thank you. Thank you. I am going to bring the voice of the Global South to this conversation. And I hate to be the token voice, but I will try that. That I think that there is tremendous thirst for oil and other natural resources. And the Global South continues to be the environment from which tremendous amount of resources are extracted and brought to global north for the benefit of people like us who live in the global north. Right? And here we are having these conversations about how there is democracy in the US and how the conditions are getting better in the US. At the same time, I do believe that the conditions are not getting better in the Global South. I come from a part of the world that has been at war for a number of decades. And if you look at Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Yemen, you name them, those nations are cursed for having oil and other sorts of minerals in their lands. So I would say that we do need to build systems that are about inclusion of the voices of those who are not included, including not just within the United States, not just people of color, women, the poor, etc. But we need to make sure that the voices of Global South are included in policy making. Thank you.
This may be on a similar vein, or we can take it a different direction, but I'm curious about, in each of your areas of expertise, what's one widely accepted idea, whether in climate, AI, demographics, that you think is overstated or fundamentally misunderstood, even among experts? I think we started to dabble in this a little bit, but from your perspective, your respective fields, what is overstated or fundamentally misunderstood? Do I get a prize if I stumped you?
Yeah. So this goes back to that research that I was mentioning earlier. So I was trained as an attorney, as well as I was trained in the Saul Alinsky style of community organizing. And I learned very often, fight the power. And I learned very often, like, this whole us versus them type of thinking, which is so predominant in our polarized nation and polarized world right now. And interestingly enough, that does not work very well. And yet, we're so trained in this that I do this exercise with everybody I work with, all the students I work with, everybody I train, where I divide up a room into 4 sectors. And then I tell everybody to get into one of those 4 sectors, so there are 4 teams, and I say to them, your goal is to get the people from the other 3 teams into your sector. And so the solution is you could just invite them all to just come into your sector, and then you'd go into their sector, and everybody wins. But instead, everybody immediately thinks of this as an us versus them. So even I was working with the Gandhi Fellows Program in India, 150 people who are all trying to be the heirs and heiresses to Mahatma Gandhi, trained in nonviolence, and immediately they started getting violent with each other and started like dragging each other across the lines. And it got so crazy that all of a sudden this one woman, she's like, oh, I think you like dislocated my shoulder, dragging me across the line. And everybody was so shocked by how dehumanized this had all became that they gathered around her in shock and shame. And she's like, I'm not really injured. I got you all in my sector. And I was like, wow, you use empathy as a weapon. This is amazing. But this is something that's so natural to our thinking that even people who are training to be the heirs and heiresses to Gandhi are thinking in this way. It's just a natural way. And what tends to work much better, many of you may have heard this story, many of you have probably read the autobiography of Malcolm X or seen Spike Lee's movie, but you may remember there's this amazing lesson that Malcolm X talks about in the movie where he has 2 glasses of water. Do you mind if I borrow this? He has 2 glasses of water, and into one he pours some oil. Well, we all know that oil and water don't mix. So now this 1 glass of water is dirty and viscous and not drinkable. And Malcolm's mentor at the time says, never tell anyone that they're holding a dirty glass of water. Because people are just going to go into denial. They're going to say, no, fake news, that my glass of water is great. They're going to hate you for pointing out what's wrong with their glass of water. And so what Malcolm's mentor said is, there's a much better strategy. Hold up a cleaner glass of water and let them make the choice for themselves which one they want. The same is true in our society. Think about my background as the environmental movement. I often will get up in front of audiences of hundreds and hundreds of people and I'll say, can anyone tell me a vision of the future in a Hollywood movie or TV show that's not dystopian or apocalyptic? Like, where is there a vision of our society that's ecologically sustainable, that's something that's so appealing that I don't care whether you're right or left or politically apathetic, you say, I want that. That's what we need to do. We talk about demonstrations, and demonstrations have come to mean protest, but we need to demonstrate what a better world looks like. We need to offer better visions of the future instead of just saying what's wrong.
I love what Scott said. And along the same lines, I'm actually in the process of writing more about this. In terms of thinking about a future, I'm really thinking about a day when the concept of enemy, the concept of a human enemy has been evicted from every mind. Where we will have museums where people can come and look at, there used to be a time when humans thought of other humans as their enemy. And where humanity was able to get to a tipping point where we decided that we no longer will dehumanize other humans and that we would see them as our enemies. And I'm not being naive about that. It's a concept that is it's a construct. It's a construct. And in many of our religions, we have the concept of enemy. Of course, in our politics, in our foreign policy, you name it, enemy is everywhere. But I'm thinking, what would it be like for us to no longer vilify humans, but rather step back and question systems of oppression, question systems that don't work for humans, like question anti-Semitism, question Islamophobia, question a system that systematically produces poverty, question those systems, but not the poor, not the Israelis, not the Iranians, not the Americans, right? What would it be like for us to believe that there is one team, and that's the human team, and that together in collaboration, we would co-create a world that works for all of us? Thank you.
Well, those were both amazing answers, and as they were giving them, it made me think of an idea that resonates with a lot of my students, and in fact, they push back sometimes when, if I'm giving an optimistic spiel in class, a lot of their reaction is sometimes, well, we need to be scaring people into action. We need to tell them how bad it could be in an absolute worst case scenario, and in fact, if we stretch the truth a little bit to scare people even more, perhaps that's the way to inspire people to make change, scare them into it. And I think, for the reasons that Scott was saying before, this is just totally misguided from my point of view. I had a student come up to me after my first semester of teaching this class. He was an economics major. I teach dual, it's both like an economics and environmental studies class. And he told me he used to be an environmental studies major, and his classes were so depressing, and he felt like there was nothing he could do. He just decided, well, why would I be an environmental studies major? We're completely doomed. I'm just going to go study economics. And after taking my class, he regretted that decision because he said, oh, wait, there's a whole bunch of solutions on the table. We actually have overcome similarly sized environmental problems in the past, or at least we thought they were of similar size. And so I think this idea that what we need to be doing is scaring people into action is a bit of a dead end. It is cathartic sometimes for those of us who are worried about problems, but I think it's not necessarily the way to get people to be making change. And so I think if we could all take this kind of attitude out into the real world when trying to inspire change, my guess is it would in fact be more persuasive. So even if you don't feel it in your bones, fake it till you make it, and perhaps more people will be excited to follow along with what you're interested in.
So you're saying we shouldn't say, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats.
I'm grappling with a few of the comments made here around a choice, and when there are choices or there are not choices, the concept of enemies, and thinking about how all of that can be monetized and how fear can be used as a weapon to motivate, Kevin, to your point. As we see those things and we understand the concepts of power and a thirst for power or oil or whatever that may be, what are your all thoughts on how we as a society overcome that way of thinking? Is it too human in us to where we can come together and not use power as a tool through fear, through creating enemies in order to advance whatever our mission is or our hope from our individual perspective?
I don't think there is anything wrong with power. We want every human to have a concept of their power and be able to actively act on their power. We want power to be aligned with rationality, thoughtfulness, humanity, dignity. When power is aligned with irrationality, it's dangerous. I work in a leadership development program too. I run an international human rights organization, and we work with young people to be able to tap into their rationality and their power in order to stand up for democracy. I do believe that greed is not a human nature, and we have to create opportunities for all of us to question how much greed has made home in our minds and in our choices. I think that in the United States, greed plays a very big role in the culture and in relationships, in the choices that we make in our communities. And greed is seen as inevitable and as a natural human characteristic. And I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that's true. And I believe that we can more and more question this distress and again, build systems that stand up to greed. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I hope it was a good beginning. Now Scotty's going to take it and run with it.
Well, thank you for that answer. I love that. So one of the projects that I'm working on right now that I'm really passionate about is sort of a counter to this notion of exponential growth of technology, because AI and the other things that we talk about, if they're not accompanied by an exponential growth in morality, of human goodness, of human kindness, of empathy, of all of these things, then we are in danger, especially from people in power. And so I look at people who have done Ironman triathlons. This may seem like a strange pivot, but Earl Warren, the former U.S. Supreme Court Justice, used to say, every day when I wake up, I read the sport pages first, because they're filled with triumph and excellence. And the front pages, they're just filled with tragedy and failure. And when you think about Ironman athletes, they are doing something, and Iron Woman, but it's called Ironman as the brand name, they are doing something that I thought was superhuman. They're swimming 2.4 miles, then they're biking 112 miles, often in humid heat, in hilly terrain, and then they run a marathon after that, a full 26.2 miles. It seems superhuman, but 1 million people around the world have accomplished this seemingly superhuman feat. And so I often wonder, could we create the equivalent that's like the Ironman of love? Like, could we train people at levels, and I know that sounds very Berkeley, but also Boulder too. And actually somebody said to me, you know, Ironman protects their brand name very strongly. If you come out with an Ironman of love, they're gonna sue you. And I said, that's amazing. Think about the publicity we're gonna get, all the free PR, this is amazing. Talk about greed. But seriously, I do think that we can create training programs where, because there's all this scientific research in how to develop compassion, kindness, empathy, but it's not something I ever learned at any level of education, K through 12, college, law school, PhD. If we can create training programs which are hard to achieve, just like being an Ironman athlete is hard to achieve. That, I think, is something that gives me a lot of hope for building a better future, and can be a counter to power and a counter to the negative externalities caused by runaway exponential technology.
Yeah, that is just an amazing answer. I was going to say almost, the same thing in way less eloquent and charismatic terms. I think about what I do all day at Middlebury, which is trying to hopefully increase my students' intelligence. But when I look around and I think about the problems we have and how we might go about fixing them, I feel like humanity is extremely good collectively at manipulating the world to our ends. We're not that short on intelligence when you think about the collective human hive mind, but we're extremely short on kindness and wisdom. And yeah, exactly, with AI increasing our ability to, we're going to see our ability to manipulate the world and change things and just increase our intelligence just continue to grow. And there seems to be just not nearly enough effort in terms of growing these kinds of empathy muscles that I think are just lagging further and further behind. So yeah, no, that was a great answer, and I just echo it.
Thank you. We have about 25 minutes left, so I'm shifting to some audience questions, but I think this continues the conversation we were just having. The question is, can you talk about the role that social media is playing with our youth and the kind of world they can envision? And I would take that so far as to add in artificial intelligence impact, integrated within social media and beyond that. It's in schools. We were having this conversation before the panel. But again, can you talk about the role that social media is playing with our youth and the kind of world they can envision?
Yeah, I was actually thinking of bringing up social media earlier, so thank you to whoever asked this question. And Joe said something about his algorithm before, and I think this does seem to be a tool that, on net makes people sadder rather than happier and more empowered. And so at the very least, I think there should be some people that just like experiment with being off of it. And so, you know, my own view is that it's a net negative on people's lives, and so I just don't have any social media, and I realize maybe I'm missing out on certain things here and there. But that seems to be something that I wish more people would do, just kind of reflect that it's possible to live your life without being on these things, such that people can make clear choices about whether or not it makes sense to be on them. And I will say, maybe both social media and AI are the things I'm most worried about in terms of, you know, if we do come back here in 2050 and we're worse off than we were in 2026, and I had to guess about what had gone wrong, it would be something along the lines of, yeah, social media just plugs right into our brains and brings out the worst in us and makes people unhappy. There seems to be emerging research that that's the case, that it's not good for people to be on this. So yeah, no, I think social media is a big unsolved challenge, and I don't know, if you think so, maybe join me in getting off of it.
I'm going to have you talk to my daughter. So in an economic system that prioritizes profit over human needs, of course, we're seeing that every new technology is used for profit making. Of course, social media at this moment is incredibly addictive, and it sells a lot. I mean, we see billionaires coming out of every corner, right? At the expenses of young people, young people's minds. At the same time, so I do think that we do need accountability and we need guardrails, really heavy-duty guardrails. And right now, of course, many of these companies are advocating for no guardrails, no accountability, no policies to take social media off the hands of young people. And we saw what happened in Spain. I'm very proud of the fact that they made a decision that young people under the age of 16 should not have access to social media. That's amazing. At the same time, I think that in some ways humanity is more connected than ever before. We are seeing history before our eyes, what's happening in every corner of the world on social media. Some of it is true, and some of it, of course, is AI generated. But at the same time, I think that many movements have been able to connect at some deep levels from around the globe because of social media. So I'm a very strong advocate of global guardrails around social media.
I would agree with that as well. I think I'm a big fan of the martial art of Aikido, where, you know, when, for those of you who don't know Aikido, when somebody could be coming at me, if you come up and talk to me afterwards, you'll see I'm a pretty small guy. And so if somebody's coming at me and they're much bigger and more muscular and whatever, if I've been trained in Aikido, I can use their power and strength to my advantage. And so I actually think social media has so much power and so much strength right now that's going for destruction, but we can use it to flip for social good, because it is incredibly powerful. Many of you know the story about, before AI and before most of social media, the most effective way of countering the tobacco companies did not come from ads that governments did, which said smoking is bad for your health and blah, blah, blah. Teenagers would wear those t-shirts ironically, and smoke and make fun and have these t-shirts that had the government slogans about how bad smoking is for your health. And so what some nonprofit folks did, which was brilliant, is they had some young people develop their own ad campaign using internet tools to create these really funny, clever ads where they would call up tobacco executives and say hey, would you get your own kids to get hooked on smoking? And the guy would who's this? No, I wouldn't do this. And they'd record this and put it on the air. And that ad, because it was taking what teenagers, maybe is your daughter a teenager? What they're really good at is anti-authority. And using Aikido to use it for social good. And that was proven in Florida and other states that use these campaigns designed by teenagers as the most effective way of getting their peers to quit smoking. So I don't disagree that it's hugely dangerous and scary, but I do think that we can use Aikido and use it as a force for positive change.
May I say a word about smoking? I was in New York City 25 years ago in New York City government when Bloomberg made smoking illegal in New York City in public spaces. And we were the first city that moved in that direction. And in fact, the tobacco company fought him tooth and nails, and he was told that that would be the end of him. And I think that it was a mayor who was not worried, a politician who was not worried about his reputation, who could afford to support himself, who was willing to move in that direction and taking a very hard stand and implementing a policy that was very much against the corporations. And then once New York City was able to make smoking illegal, then many other cities took it on. But I'm glad to hear what happened among the young people. Thank you.
I think this is a great question. Is humanity's greatest risk external forces or our own ability to cooperate at scale? And that will conclude our panel. Just kidding. Is humanity's greatest risk external forces or our own ability to cooperate at scale?
I think it seems very much more likely that the problems of human coordination are much bigger than external natural threats. I mean, even our biggest natural threats now, so something like climate change, comes from the fact that we're not able to coordinate on reducing emissions. And so I would even bucket our biggest natural external style threats to be driven by a lack of human coordination. And in the case of climate change, it's not necessarily seeing people as your enemy, but coming back to what Ozzy was saying before, I think, this lack of feeling like we're all on the same team and that the world is not zero sum and that everybody's lives can improve simultaneously, that may just be our biggest challenge. I don't have a solution to getting people to feel this other than, hopefully working out our empathy muscles a little bit and honestly learning the facts about the world that fortunes tend to go together more than they diverge. I think the story of humanity is one in which there are still lots of problems around the world, but I would say even in the global south now, infant mortality is lower than it's ever been. The height of children, as I mentioned in the very beginning, is going up. So I see our story as one where things have gone together more so than that it's been an exploitative process. Now, of course, there has been lots of exploitation, so that's not to say there hasn't been, but when looking at the broader sweep of are we competing or are we working together, I think the story is that we have made things better together.
Yeah, I would actually argue that external forces may be our best hope. I did my terrible impression of Bill Clinton before. Now I'll try a terrible impression of Ronald Reagan. He was like, well, no, I can't do it. But I was not a big fan of Reagan, but one of the things that he said was one of the ways to end the Cold War would be if aliens invaded, from outer space. Because kind of like in the movie Independence Day, it would bring all the, warring nations together on the same team. And I do think there's this fantastic book that many of you may know, Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, which talks about when humanity faces crises like 9/11, or she looks at the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, and many other things. She says, the theory that a lot of people have is that humans are just going to fight with each other over scarce resources. But she said, actually, when you look at the evidence, crises bring out the best in people. They bring out the kindness, the empathy, the helping behaviors. Yes, there are a few people who will exploit the greed and whatever else, but for the most part, the vast majority of people become more cooperative and helping out strangers in times of need. And so I actually think that some of these external forces that we face could be the greatest thing in bringing us together, changing the dynamic from us versus them to we're all in this together versus the common problems that we share.
Thank you. I love the idea of us versus not the idea. I love standing up against us versus them. And also, I know that there are many policies, many strategies at play that are about divide and conquer. How do you break a movement, civil rights movement? How do you break a revolutionary movement? How do you destroy, make sure that a colonized nation does not stand up against imperialism? And over and over and over, what we have seen are divide and conquer strategies. In this country, in this moment, we're seeing how immigrants are systematically blamed for the failing economic system, are systematically blamed for jobs not being in the community, right? So I think that we have to get better and better for calling these strategies for what they are. They're about divide and conquer, dividing the working class to really stand up for their rights, for stand up for better conditions. Thank you.
I want to push on that a little bit through this question. This person writes, one of the most powerful solutions, and this was mentioned earlier, to empathy and compassion for humanity is real connection. So I think I read this as empathy is one of those ways in which we may help alleviate the conquer and divide or the us versus them. So I'm adding to this question a little bit. How do we build capacity for that? And this person poses some ideas about how to get students to study abroad, how to travel more, be vulnerable with homestays. Are there other ideas that you have to build capacity through empathy or other solutions to help mitigate what you were just discussing?
I personally love listening circles, where we create opportunities for people from different backgrounds and different nationalities, languages, religions come together and divide the time and not interrupt one another and give each person equal time to go around and talk. And really training ourselves to be able to listen. I also like truth and reconciliation strategies where people are able to come and talk about their experiences and how a certain set of policies, wars, etc., have affected them, have affected their lives and where they're at. And finally, I am a big advocate of travel. There's nothing like travel. However, we often have people from the global south going to global north going to global south in an incredibly voyeuristic, imperialistic ways. So I would highly recommend, if we do travel, to be very thoughtful of the people whose lands we're going to, and what are the unintended negative consequences of being a traveler and a tourist. Thanks.
So I was talking before about the power of a curriculum, like this idea of, the Iron Man of love. But I have a friend, Julie Winston, who teaches at University of Texas at Austin, who developed a curriculum around connection, around human connection. Because, again, she said, this is something that most people don't have at any level of education, and yet what could be more important as a skill? And so Kevin, you were mentioning before that your students are very, very intelligent, and the students here at CU are very intelligent, and so many students are brilliant, but instead of IQ, she developed CQ, connection quotient. And she developed a way to be able to actually measure, and then students go through this course and just seeing the dramatic increases in their ability to connect with each other, to connect with themselves, to connect with nature, it's really inspiring. So I think there are so many opportunities in education. I mean, education is going to be a $10 trillion field by 2030. There's so many opportunities to invest in education that really matters. In some ways, the fact that AI and Google and whatever else are taking like the traditional sage on the stage away, because you can learn facts from AI. What we really need out of education is teaching us these core human skills that computers cannot replicate, as much as they may try with connection. I read a New York Times article this morning about like a woman who was like, in love with their AI chatbot or something. But like, as much as we try, the truth is human connection is something that computers and AI will never be able to replicate. So we need to be able to develop curricula to develop it in ourselves.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to these excellent answers. I think I am wary that it's going to get harder and harder as our digital world gets more and more appealing. And so these are the right questions to be asking now. How do we be intentional about forming connections there? You know, it's not necessarily something that just automatically happens. And I think that's something, it falls into this space where people think it will, it'll just naturally appear in some way or another without effort or intentionality. And so I think, yeah, thinking hard about this is a good first step.
I'm hoping to squeeze in 2 more questions in our final 7 minutes here. So combining one, this question's from a student. In a one team, one fight approach, we usually assess our tools case by case rather than a blanket answer. If we can use propaganda for good and a super athlete to win the narrative, shouldn't we be training people on how to engage effectively in these spaces instead of staying clear? When does the mission require us to be on the digital retreat versus the front lines?
Yeah, I think the recognition that we have case-by-case decisions to make is smart and very wise here. I mean, of course, we're talking about such a gigantic topic, how to build a better future, how to save humanity, that a lot of what we're saying is going to be at the level of high abstraction and generalization and platitudes, hopefully not too many platitudes. But yeah, no, I think it depends case by case, and studying past successful social movements, I think that seems to be a little bit underrated sometimes, of looking back at what successful social missions did in the past, because sometimes it's inconvenient relative to what we might think is how we want to do things, perhaps no compromise, no holds bar, for example, and then you read about the civil rights movement and you see how much compromising was done. And so I think there's lots of examples like this where thinking about things case by case and studying how pragmatic versus idealistic past movements were, understanding them. I'm no expert in any of this. I just know that when I've taken the time to look at the details of how big change has occurred, I've often found myself both surprised and seeing how things going on today might learn a bit from looking at some of these past movements.
Great. Yes to studying social movements. I also would say yes to studying philosophy. I love philosophy. And studying economy, and specifically political economy, really learning about the other economic systems that have existed, enslavement, feudalism, and now capitalism, and what's the next economic system that we want to build as intentionally as humanity. Thanks.
Yeah, I echo that, studying social movements. I just came from a panel with Srđan Popović, who led the Otpor movement in Serbia, this great nonviolent revolution that took down Milosevic. For those of you who don't know him, he's here and speaking over the next few days. And his story is really inspiring because NATO bombed Serbia trying to get rid of Milosevic, and it actually backfired. We spent $2 billion bombing Serbia, and people actually rallied behind the dictator, because if you're getting bombed and your life is at risk. And so once the bombs ended, Milosevic was still in power, and Srđan and just 11 other young people started a nonviolent revolution that took down the dictator. There's a fantastic documentary about it, narrated by Martin Sheen, called Bringing Down a Dictator. I think you can find it online. But Srđan's here, and as the last session, he was talking about how they built off the work of Gene Sharp, who was this great nonviolence scholar at Harvard, who looked at all the different strategies that are effective. And there's another researcher at Harvard, Erica Chenoweth. Some of you may be familiar with her. I think she was at Colorado State before Harvard. And she's found that nonviolence is actually far more effective than violence, and she's actually done the research. So there are great lessons to be learned, and the wisdom is there if only we mine it.
I'm going to read two cards. They're similar questions, but also different, and you have 30 seconds to respond. Okay. The first one mentions, after being let go from USAID after 20 years of service, how can I, or those of us who are in the international development world, continue to contribute to bringing hope to civilization in the world? I love that. How can we continue to contribute to bringing hope to civilization in the world? And another take on it is from a student. What's one thing we can do when we leave this room to help build a brighter future in each of your respective fields? What a great way to end. 30 seconds, the clock starts with you. Kevin.
All right, I'll go first. First of all, to whoever was working for USAID and was let go, thank you for your wonderful service to humanity, and I'm sorry about how things are. And maybe a more productive answer to the student, I really do think a first step is recognizing that we can, in fact, build a better future, and that excessive doomsday pessimism is only useful insofar as it motivates change. And if you don't find it motivating yourself, then, come hang out with the optimists. We're also trying to make some change, and it's a lot of fun.
I would say to the student, develop a vision of the world you want, find your North Star, and systematically move in that direction. And find a group of people who can back you, mentor you, support you when things get hard, when you're moving towards your North Star. And to the USAID, thank you. Yes, thank you for your service. And hopefully, I would think that in the next 3-4 years, when we go back to rethinking about international development, I think there will be amazing opportunities to rebuild. USAID was one system, but I think that we've learned a lot from there were a lot of lessons learned from both how successful it was and some of its failures, so we can learn from all of that and rebuild a system that works for everyone, including the people in the global south. Thanks.
So I'll just end my remarks by talking about it. I'm a total science nerd, and I love what the cutting edge research shows. So I was talking about the science of hope, the science of compassion, of love, of empathy. But take a look at the science of heroism. There is an amazing group of scholars. Some of them have recently passed away, like Sam Oliner, who was a Holocaust survivor, who spent most of his life looking at what motivated the heroic people who helped people during the Holocaust at risk to their own lives, often total strangers. Phil Zimbardo at Stanford, who led the Stanford Prison Experiment, which was really a study in how people do evil. And so late in life, he said, I want to study how people not just do good, but do heroic things. So we only have 30 seconds. I probably have 3 seconds. Go look at the science of heroism. It's inspiring.
Aziz, Scott, Kevin, thank you all for your remarks today, for being here. Thank you all for joining this session. Wish you the best in the remainder of the conference. Take care.